Well, thank you for making the effort to get here tonight. I happen to know that it was not easy, and there are some folks that were not able to come because of the weather that's outside. But I'd like to introduce to you Reverend Tom Anderson, who is listed as the organizer. I think of him as the president of the Michigan WCA, or Wesleyan Covenant Association. I've been communicating with Tom for a number of years by email, and every once in a while I get an opportunity to actually see him in person. I want you to know that there is a great spirit in him dealing with some what are very difficult issues inside our Methodist Church. And I appreciate him so much for his willingness to do such a job that frequently can be very challenging. I also want you to know that he's pretty well connected with the Global Wesleyan Covenant Association, and we are getting a lot of good information from him when the WCA has something that they want to share with us. He's agreed to be with us. There'll be a presentation about 30 minutes in length, maybe longer if you interrupt him. And then also there's a question and answer session that could last for an extensive period of time, particularly if you have an extensive number of questions you'd like him to respond to. So our speaker for this evening, Reverend Tom Anderson.
Thank you very much, Larry. I guess I'm on. Sounds like I'm on. I've been a pastor here in the Michigan Annual Conference for 38 years. And I grew up in the United Methodist Church in Dearborn, and that's where I met my wife, and we've been married for 42 years. We have 2 grown children, and they both live in the Upper Peninsula. Currently, I serve at Thrive Church in Highland. I've been there 6 years. And I am also, as Larry mentioned, I am the president of the Wesleyan Covenant Association, which formed in 2016. So I'm here tonight because I'm really excited about God doing a new thing. It's called the Global Methodist Church. And I have to tell you, I have never been so excited about the Methodist movement as I am today. I think God is about to do a new thing. I think there is probably a time of chaos and disorder upon us, but I think when we come out of the end of it, the Global Methodist Church is going to be in a position to really launch a new ministry and reach new people for Christ in this 21st century, and I'm really excited about that. So I want to talk a little bit about this this evening, and with the magic of this, hey, it's working. We're going to start with a scripture from a book in the New Testament that a lot of people have forgotten that it's there. It's one of the last books of the Bible, just before the book of Revelation. It's Jude, written by the half-brother of our Lord Jesus. And in fact, Jude 3 and 4, which is the second and fourth verses, or the third and fourth verses. He says this, "Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people. For certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. They are ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into a license for immorality and deny Jesus Christ, our only sovereign and Lord." It's kind of a little reminder that the situation we face today is not new in the history of the church. We are in a moment where we need to contend for the faith that was once and for all delivered to the saints, to God's people. John Wesley said this, "I am not afraid that the people called Methodists should ever cease to exist, either in Europe or America, but I am afraid lest they should only exist as a dead sect, having the form of religion without the power. And this undoubtedly will be the case unless they hold fast the doctrine, spirit, and discipline with which they first set out." So the vision of the Global Methodist Church is a church that is alive, that holds Jesus as Lord over all things, and the Holy Spirit as the engine of the church. A church that believes in scriptural authority, is clear about its doctrine and mission, and holds people accountable for missional purposes. I was just looking at a tweet this today from a colleague of mine, and he said this about his church: if you're looking for a church that apologizes for the Bible, this ain't it. I thought that was a good quote. It will be a church that is streamlined, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, that is streamlined and less complex with a less costly overhead. And the emblem of this is that, the United Methodist Book of Discipline right now is in excess of 900 pages. 900 pages. The Book of Doctrines and Discipline of the Global Methodist Church is 100 pages. 800 pages of stuff is going to go away. 800 pages of layers of permission, management, regulation, and complex and sometimes ambiguous language is going to go away. It will be a church that works hard to meet people at their point of need and offer them Jesus. I think in the past 40, 50 years, the United Methodist Church has been very good at working hard to meet people at the point of their need. But what's been left out is offering people Christ, offering people Jesus. A church that is clear about what it is for and no longer has to be distracted for decades fighting about what it is against. This is probably the greatest tragedy in the United Methodist Church. Our denomination is only 53 years old, and we have been consumed with an intractable argument that has consumed our time, our money, and all of our efforts. And in fact, what has been a result is the church is in precipitous decline because we put all of our attention and our efforts into this debate that we've been stuck in. It will be a church that knows we are burdened for the souls of those who don't know Jesus, and we must reach all generations and ages. I've been to the annual conference in Traverse City the last 3 years. Well, it was in Traverse City in person this year, but it was on Zoom 2 years before that, the 2 years before that. And, I counted it up. In the last 3 years, our annual conference has closed 40 churches. And in the last 3 years, we've been registering a loss of membership, a net loss of membership of between 5,000 and 5,400 a year. So in 3 years, that's over 15,000 people. That's really bad. But to me, what is more concerning is that at our annual conferences, no one talks about this. No one ever says, what can we do to reach new people for Christ? No one ever talks about it. And in the Global Methodist Church, that will be the focus. Reaching people for Christ, planting new congregations, reaching new generations for Christ. So you all know that the General Conference has been postponed till 2024. And we won't get into the reasons why that. It is what it is. And so this is what I want to talk to you about tonight. There are now 4 pathways that congregations can follow to exit the United Methodist Church and then to join the Global Methodist Church. One of them you probably know a lot about. It's called Disaffiliation under paragraph 2553, and we'll talk about these in a second. The second one would be to withdraw from the United Methodist Church in order to unite with the Global Methodist Church under paragraph 2548.2 in the Book of Discipline. A third option is to close the church under paragraph 2549 and then reopen it as a Global Methodist Church. And then finally, number 4 would be a joint legal strategy with multiple churches to depart the annual conference. This is what is now happening in Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and it will be elsewhere as well, and is in Michigan as well. It's underway. So let's talk about disaffiliate, or let's talk, ooh, did I move too fast here? No, I didn't. Okay. Let's talk about paragraph 2548.2. This is a paragraph that allows a church to withdraw from the United Methodist Church and align with another evangelical denomination. This particular paragraph has been in our Book of Discipline since 1948, so it has nothing to do with the current crisis. It has rarely been used, but it has been used. And so what happens is that the church creates a comity agreement between the church, the Global Methodist Church, and the annual conference. That's negotiated out, and there are some templates with the Council of Bishops has already negotiated a template for this. It must be approved by the bishop, the cabinet, the district board of church building and location, and the annual conference. And the unfunded pension liabilities could be handled creatively. And I should say I'll talk about the unfunded pension liabilities first. And here I'm going to go into the weeds. And if you don't follow all of this, that's okay. It's pretty complicated. It took me a couple of times around it to grasp it. But the unfunded pension liability is, if you are a United Methodist pastor and you go to the Westpath website and you look at your pension plan, Westpath will tell you that your pension plan is fully funded through the year 2090. No United Methodist minister should be anxious or worried that their pension plan is unfunded. It is fully funded through the year 2090 using all the industry standard and federal guidelines for planning and actuarial tables. 6% growth in the corpus and the actuarial tables and the ordinary lifespan of clergy. So the pension plan is secure. It's not really in question. So what is the unfunded liability then? This would be a doomsday scenario. What if the clergy who are retired lived 10 years longer than they would be expected to live? And what if there was an economic catastrophe and the churches were unable to contribute and the corpus only grew 2% or less? Then it's a doomsday scenario. And I got to tell you, this has never happened in my 38 years of ministry. Westpath would then have to ask local churches for additional contributions to shore up the pension plan. But this doomsday scenario is so bad that if it ever happened, you and I would be out in the state park looking for things to eat. It would be really bad. So what Westpath has done is they've created an aggregate figure of what this unfunded liability would be, and they've assigned it to each annual conference based on their size. And then the annual conference, such as the Michigan Annual Conference, takes that number using their own formula and decides how much of a share each local church would have in that unfunded liability. As a United Methodist congregation, you already have this unfunded liability. It's already a liability hanging over you. And if Westpath ever needed it in a catastrophic situation, then the annual conference would include it in your ministry shares and your apportionments. That's how they would get it from you. So if a church were to leave the United Methodist Church, then there must be some provision for this unfunded liability. Under disaffiliation, you're required to pay the entire amount up front. And for many churches, that's a 6-figure amount. In Highland, our number is $257,000. We would have to pay that up front. But under this paragraph, 2548.2, it would be possible to handle that unfunded liability in a far more friendly way. For example, the issuing of a 0% promissory note. Basically, the church signs a note that puts you, legally bound to care for this unfunded liability should it ever occur, your share of it. And there'd be no interest charged to this promissory note. And here's the other thing about the unfunded liability. It's going to go away. Sometime in the next 15 to 20 years, the legacy benefits of the current pension plan are going to slowly extinguish. The corpus is going to continue to grow, and that we will reach a point in which the unfunded liability will disappear. And at that point, the 0% promissory note would be canceled. So this is a way of allowing churches to leave without paying some big upfront liability. You would still carry the liability, but it would go with you into the new denomination. Unfortunately, this paragraph has been referred by the bishops to the Judicial Council for a ruling on whether or not it is constitutional and appropriate to use in this fashion. That's kind of a curious request, since the thing has been in the discipline since 1948, and we're just now figuring out, now 60, 70 years later, we're just now asking whether or not it's constitutional. Clearly, there is a concerted effort on part of the Council of Bishops and the progressive leaders of the denomination to get the Judicial Council to rule this to be unconstitutional and inappropriate. And that ruling should come out this month, sometime soon. We'll hear about it. And if that happens, then this paragraph, this way of exiting, will be closed, will be not possible. So, okay, somehow I missed disaffiliation. So let me go back. There's a slide missing, or something happened there. Anyhow, let's go back to disaffiliate under 2553. This paragraph was, it's in there. Okay, that's good. Well, it's missing in the stack here somehow. Something happened. At any rate, I don't need it. Disaffiliation this paragraph was created in 2019 at the special session of the General Conference that was aimed at resolving all of this issue before us. And so because it was created then, they believed, the creators and the General Conference believed, that that another General Conference would have already occurred by now. And separation probably would have happened, and this paragraph wouldn't be necessary. So they put a sunset on it. That means this paragraph expires in 2020, at the end of 2023, the calendar year. That's important because it means that this door is going to close. And since it requires a vote of the annual conference to disaffiliate, there is only one more annual conference to use this paragraph. So if a church has the funds to disaffiliate and has the wherewithal to do this, then you should pursue it, because the door is going to close. So for our church, there are three fees that go into this paragraph. One is, of course, the unfunded liability, which I told you about. That would have to be paid up front. The second is you need to pay the previous 12 months of ministry shares and the next 12 months of ministry shares. And then thirdly, you would have to pay for the value of your property. And the annual conference has set this as a guideline for determining the value. It would be 2 years of ministry shares, whatever that number is for you. So for us in Highland, the total amount required to disaffiliate would be close to $500,000. That's not really practical for us. And for some churches, they have gone that way. We have had 9 or 10 churches in Michigan disaffiliate, including 4 last year. And if you go to the conference website, you can see the 4 that disaffiliated this year, and you can click on the title of the church, and you will see the exact terms of their disaffiliation. You can read about that in the annual, right online. All right, so we talked about paragraph 2553. Wake up, Glenn. There we go. Oh, my goodness, we're still going backwards. We talked about 2548.2. And now here's the third way out. Closure under paragraph 2549. A local church discerns it wants to close. They close the building. They walk away from the property. And then all the property goes back to the annual conference. And at that point, the local church can perhaps make an offer to buy the property back from the annual conference. But of course, under this paragraph, the annual conference has no obligation to sell the property back to the same church. And they also have the ability to set the price of that property. So this paragraph is not really attractive to most churches unless, I was talking to a church just this week, they have a $3.5 million debt. Now, I don't think debt is a really good thing to have, but in this case, it is leverage. Because that congregation can go to the annual conference trustees or to the bishop and say, we want to go into the Global Methodist Church. And if you don't want to negotiate with us, we're going to walk away from our building. And you get the building. And guess what else you get? You get the debt. Our annual conference is in considerable financial distress or weakness, and they're not going to want a $3.5 million debt. And at that point, undoubtedly, the trustees of the annual conference would be willing to negotiate better terms than any of things I have said here. So in that case, it makes sense for a local church to maybe use this paragraph as a place to bargain with the annual conference. And then finally, the fourth one would be a joint legal strategy. A church decides to depart from the United Methodist Church, retains legal counsel with a group of other United Methodist churches in the annual conference. They send a letter to the annual conference asking for negotiations. If the annual conference refuses to negotiate, attorneys file individual legal actions on behalf of every church. This is what is now happening in Florida. There are 106 churches. There are actually 135 who are part of the alliance in Florida, fully 20% of the membership of the Florida Annual Conference. And they are using a nonprofit legal firm called the National Center for Law and Liberty. And this is a well-established organization. David Gibbs is the executive director of it. And they only handle cases of church law and life, issues of life. Some of you, in fact, I think everybody in the room here probably remembers the Terry Schiavo case in Florida, the young woman whom they were going to euthanize, and that went to the Supreme Court. And her life was saved by the lawyers who argued that case. That was the NCLL. That was David Gibbs who argued that case in the Supreme Court. So what happens is that a church simply joins the NCLL for a cost of $1,000. And then the lawyer, David Gibbs, and the other lawyers, attorneys associated with the NCLL would then represent your church. And so in Florida, it's not a class action lawsuit. It's not where it's all together in one suit. In Florida, it's 106 separate cases. So that means that when they file their suit, file their action against the annual conference, the annual conference attorney needs to respond 106 times to 106 separate cases. So you can see the time that will take and the frustration that will bring. And the point of this is not to go to court, but it is to negotiate, to find a compromise. And part of the problem we are in is that the bishops and the annual conference leadership all across the United States have pretty much made it clear over the last 6 months they don't want to negotiate with anybody. They want to prescribe the terms and usually set a very high fee, which essentially closes the door for most people, for most congregations. So the more churches, the better, as it motivates the annual conference to negotiate because of the extreme expense of that case. There are dozens of churches in Michigan, I can tell you, who want to form an alliance, and one will be forming this fall. And the WCA in Michigan will be holding some online meetings, some Zoom meetings, yet this month, August 20th, which is a Saturday, August 24th, which is a Wednesday night, and August 27th, which is another Saturday. And at those meetings, they'll all be the same meeting, but we want to give enough opportunity for everyone to come. And those who don't have internet access or technological ability can come to an in-person site and Zoom with the rest of us. And you will hear a presentation from the WCA and from the NCLL. And you will have your opportunity to join in this alliance. And it will require signing some authorization papers to have them represent you, and of course the $1,000 membership in the NCLL. Our deadline for joining the alliance will be October the 1st. And then once that deadline passes, then the NCLL will begin by reaching out to the bishop and the annual conference leadership to initiate some negotiations, better terms than what are currently on offer in 2553. If you're a clergy person, and I think there's at least one here, and myself, and I will say this, I fully intend to transfer my ordination into the Global Methodist Church. I will be doing that. I want to do it in tandem with my congregation. It would be better for them if I did it that way, but if that is not possible, I will be at some point moving my ordination into the Global Methodist Church. If that is the case, if you should not precipitately withdraw your credentials until you speak to a Global Methodist Church representative. And that would be Angela Pleasance, and her contact information is on the Global Methodist website. And you can learn more about how to do that as well. If a local church aligns with the Global Methodist Church, but the pastor does not, the Global Methodist Church will then appoint a new pastor to that church in the interim. We are in a transitional period. The church is still forming, and most of it is on paper. But somebody said, "When are you going to have these committees?" And this was a conference leader, and I said, "Well, if you would let us out, we could populate these committees, but we can't right now." Most of the Global Methodist Church is trapped inside the United Methodist Church, and if you let us out, we can begin to get it better organized. But there is a transitional leadership council, and they are indeed taking clergy memberships. The Global Methodist Church has already launched. It launched on the May 1st, and we already have churches and whole annual conferences who have joined. The first annual conference to join was Bulgaria and Romania. How about that? 40 churches in that annual conference, and all of them, this is what really moves me, all of them were missionary congregations supported in large part by funding from the United Methodist Board of Global Ministries, and they walked away from all of it. They were so excited about the Global Methodist Church, they were willing to walk away from that funding. That says a lot to me about the spiritual vitality of our movement. And then, of course, there are other churches that are joining. In this past year, 70 churches in North Georgia Annual Conference disaffiliated, 30 more in the South Georgia Annual Conference, and there'll be more next year, 69 in the Great Plains Annual Conference, 29 in Indiana. How is this happening? Well, there is another way to get funding for disaffiliation. And that is, churches are borrowing money. There is a foundation in Indiana called the Wesleyan Investment Foundation. They are a sort of a branch of the Wesleyan Church, and they are quite willing to loan money to United Methodist congregations to disaffiliate for a 2% interest rate. You can go to their website. I'm not recommending you do this. I'm just saying it's an opportunity for you. It is a resource for you. You can go to their website, and this is how 29 churches in Indiana were able to disaffiliate this year. They borrowed money from the Wesleyan Investment Fund. All right, and I should say, at this past week, the Wesleyan Covenant Association announced that a fund called No Church Left Behind, and they are now looking for donors, and part of the fund is to provide, if a church wants to join the NCLL and join in legal negotiations with the annual conference, the WCA will have this funds available for small churches who maybe can't afford the $1,000. And it is also available to conferences to hire employees, Wesleyan Covenant associations, to hire employees to help them recruit and assist churches. So what does the Wesleyan Covenant Association recommend? Well, first of all, we recommend disaffiliation because it's the only certain way. If you have the money, if you can complete the process in time, do it and don't look back. Because it's the only certain way. The second best choice would be to join the legal strategy. And that's probably what the church I serve is going to do, because disaffiliation is simply a non-starter for us. So we'll probably join the legal negotiations. And if you want to do that, then I think you do want to do that, because I got an email from Larry. You will let me know, and even if you're already signed up with the NCLL, I talked to David Gibbs tonight, and they'll simply include you as part of the alliance. I believe it won't take much effort, and we'll have 40 to 50 churches as part of the alliance, without maybe more. I don't know. I can't predict these things. And then, I mentioned the cost. The cost is $1,000 to be a member of the NCLL. And the only other cost would be, if it does get to the point where you have to file a court action, then there would be the filing fees, which may be $800 to $1,000. But there's nothing else beyond that. There's no attorney hours to pay for. Probably the worst option is to do nothing. You know, I spoke in a small church up in the Thumb, and there were 60 people there Monday night from 4 different churches. And afterwards, a layperson from a very small church came up to me and said, "This is the first time I've heard of any of this stuff, and I'm concerned, and it's all so complicated." And he asked me this. He said, "What if we just do nothing?" And here was my answer to him. Now is the time, because it's clear the leaders of our denomination are betting that they're going to be able to prevail and change the church at the General Conference of 2024, and then close the exits. And that would seem to be what they want to do. And that would, to me, it's very difficult to say what will happen at the General Conference 2024, but if you ask me to guess, I would say this: probably nothing. The signers of the protocol, which would have made this so much easier, and if separation was going to resolve our dispute and enable us to go on our separate ways and get back involved in ministry, if that was going to happen, it needed to be quick, and it needed to be simple. And it's now clear it's not going to be quick, and it's not going to be simple. The signers of the protocol, the progressive and centrist signers, have reneged on their agreement. And all of the centrist and progressive organizations that endorsed the protocol have now withdrawn their endorsement. This makes it very uncertain that it will pass, even if altered. Because the General Conference is 860 people from all over the world. They don't know each other. They have all kinds of interests, and it's probably likely that they are simply going to be unable to unite around any plan of separation, and the church will be stuck. as we have been for the last 4 years. So anybody who's hoping that the General Conference will be able to resolve this has not really been paying attention to the way things are unraveling in our church. The other danger here is this. And we now know, we now have, if you want to know what's going to happen to the United Methodist Church, once it changes its definition of marriage and once it changes its ordination standards, we now have 4 clear case studies of what will happen. One of those case studies is called the United Church of Christ. Another one is called the Episcopal Church. A third is called the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And a fourth is called the Presbyterian Church USA. In all 4 of those congregations, once they changed their definition of marriage, or in some cases, abolished their definition of their understanding of marriage, the church went into precipitous decline. The Presbyterian Church USA is now losing 5% of their membership in a year. Do the math. In 10 years' time, there will be half the number of Presbyterians that there are right now. The Episcopal Church USA, when I served in the Upper Peninsula 14 years ago, the Upper Peninsula was its own diocese. There were 27 Episcopal churches up there. They had their own bishop. Today, there are 2 Episcopal churches. It's now part of the Greater Michigan Diocese, and in probably 5 to 10 years, those 2 churches will be gone. It's likely that in the United Methodist Church, after we change our definition of marriage, it's quite clear the Michigan Annual Conference is going to turn sharply to the left, and that will result in precipitant decline. The United Methodist Church is dying, and if you stay in it, you will be in the vortex. And I'm not saying that you will die, but the likelihood of being able to prosper in a struggling denomination is low. So the option of doing nothing is to bet away the future of your church. It is that serious. If I didn't believe that what is going on right now in the United Methodist Church isn't a serious threat to the Christian faith, I wouldn't be here tonight. I wouldn't be doing any of this. I would have no business doing it. But I do believe the future of the church is at stake. So doing nothing is to put the future of your congregation at great risk. The Wesleyan Covenant Association, this is a confusing thing. What's the difference between the Wesleyan Covenant Association and the Global Methodist Church? Well, I'll admit, it is confusing. These are confusing times. The Wesleyan Covenant Association was created to midwife the birth of this new denomination. Now it has been born. It is up and running. But now the mission of the Wesleyan Covenant Association is focused inside the United Methodist Church to try and help all of those churches, conservative, traditional, or progressive and liberal, to find a just and equitable way to leave if they wish. And so that's our main focus. Our movement has 2 feet. We got 1 foot inside the church and 1 is outside. The Global Methodist Church is already functioning. I do not speak for them. They already have their own organization and structure. But in the WCA, we are working inside the United Methodist Church as United Methodists to try and help each other find a way to have a just and gracious separation in the denomination for the benefit of everyone. The mission statement of the Global Methodist Church is this: to make disciples of Jesus Christ that worship passionately, love extravagantly, and witness boldly. It will be a church of orthodox theology, firmly in line with 2,000 years of Christian doctrine and tradition, and we will keep the gospel teaching on marriage. When Mr. Wesley began the Methodist movement, he often spoke about the connection, the Methodist connection. And when he used that word, he was not referring to church bureaucracy. He wasn't referring to boards and agencies or denominational staff people. That was not the connection for Mr. Wesley. For Mr. Wesley, the connection was the doctrine and discipline of the church. And this will be the focus of the Global Methodist Church. We will not be aligned. We will not have a lot of boards and agencies or denominational staff. What will hold us together is a common alignment to the doctrine of the Wesleyan movement. And those churches that do not align with that will be free to leave, because we will be a coalition of the willing and the people who want to be in the church and believe in its mission. And those who don't are not going to be trapped in it or not be held captive. It will be a far less complex church. A new book of doctrines and discipline, 88% reduction from the current book of discipline. Bishops will be term limited, and they will be held accountable. This is one of the great problems in the United Methodist Church, is that bishops are elected for life, and there is no meaningful accountability to them. They are not accountable to anyone. They are accountable to each other, and that's not good. It has not worked, and that is why we have a bishop who is serving now, who the Judicial Council 6 years ago declared to be an illegal candidate. And yet that individual is still serving. Why? Because the bishops are only accountable to each other, and there's no way to hold them accountable. But in the Global Methodist Church, bishops will be elected by the annual conference, and they will be directly accountable to the annual conference. And there will be an enhancement of accountability at all levels of the church. There'll be tremendous diversity in the government of the church. Churches can organize themselves in all kinds of ways and get involved in all kinds of mission. But the thing that will hold us together is that if you go to Bulgaria, or if you go to Liberia, or if you go to Idaho, you will hear the same gospel message, the same gospel teaching. That is where we will align. So churches and pastors will need to sign off on the doctrines of the church. Apportionments will be significantly lower. Somebody asked me this week, what are they going to be? Well, we don't have a budget yet, so I'm sorry, but I can't really tell you what they will be. But I can tell you this, in the United Methodist Church, nationwide, the average local church contributes about 14% of their budget to ministry shares or apportionments. In the Global Methodist Church, we've set a target for no more than 7%, so at least, and probably it's going to be less than that. And those apportionments will be focused on three things. One will be at the administrative costs of the annual conference. A second will be clergy education and training. And a third will be church planting. And that will be it. We will be focused on planting churches and equipping leaders to serve those churches. And there will be no trust clause. That means once you exit the United Methodist Church, for the first time, the property and the assets of your congregation will be completely under your control. And so if you decide to move your building, if you decide to build a new building, if you decide to move somewhere else, you will not need to get the permission of the district and the conference to do that. You will have full control over the assets of your congregation. There will be two orders of clergy, elders and deacons. And anybody who is a local pastor in the United Methodist Church right now, and in Michigan, probably between 35 and 38% of our churches are served by local pastors. If they go into the Global Methodist Church, they will be ordained, because we will not have a category of local pastors anymore. They will be ordained. All of the clergy will be ordained in the Global Methodist Church. There will be a commitment to female clergy and clergy of color. There will be no guaranteed appointment. And churches and clergy that transition together can stay together in the Global Methodist Church. In other words, if you like your church and you like your pastor, you go into the Global Methodist Church, you're going to stay there. I can tell you, there are a lot of other things they need to do right now. They're not going to be messing with people's relationships there. And in the future, churches will have a far greater say in the recruiting and hiring of their pastor. They will actually be able to interview people and be a part of that process. Local churches must have a leadership team, but they can otherwise structure themselves in any way that they wish for effectiveness. The Global Methodist Church will continue to use Westpath for clergy and lay employee retirement benefits. The retirement plan will soon be announced with Westpath for the Global Methodist Church. It will be a defined contribution plan, which means there will never, ever be an unfunded liability. And that plan is going to be far more generous than the current United Methodist plan, and it's going to cost less. Which leads me to health insurance. In the Global Methodist Church, there will be a denominational health plan. It will be administered by Westpath. Churches can choose to use it or not. It will be an option for you. And it will be offer benefits as generous as the current Michigan Annual Conference offers for a lot less. Most clergy, if you have a clergy and spouse, you're paying for their health care $22,000 a year, or $22,500, maybe a little more than that. If you went on healthcare.gov and you found a silver plan equivalent to the current Michigan plan, it might set you back $13,000 to $15,000. So in the new denomination, there will be a significant savings in local churches on health care by $7,000 or $8,000. That is very likely to happen. And then there will be a church planting movement. The Global Methodist Church, when it was launched, announced that they set a goal of planting 3,500 new congregations globally in our first 7 years. So I've been part of the Michigan Annual Conference for 38 years. And really, you know, our church is only 53 years old. And since 1968 here in Michigan, every year we have recorded a net loss of members. Every year for 53 years, we have had a losing season. Not even the Detroit Lions are that bad. And after all of that, no one ever talks about a plan to reach new people for Christ. And to my knowledge, our annual conference has never set a goal for planting new churches, ever. This is something I can get excited about. This is something that fires me up. It is part of the spiritual vitality of our movement that we want to be in mission. We want to reach people for Christ. And to be part of that is something that will bring life to every local church. So what would be the next steps? For a local church, it would be to form a transition team. The team will oversee the details of transition, follow the steps outlined. There is a next steps document that I think, Larry, you probably have. And the team should obviously include your pastor and your church leaders. And you should keep the church and the church council informed of those details. If you don't know your numbers for disaffiliation, you should call the district. They have the numbers. They already have them now, but it has to be the pastor who calls, and they will give you your share of the unfunded liability and just what it would cost for you to disaffiliate. And then if you want to be part of the alliance for legal negotiations at the annual conference, you can contact me. And you should be praying. This is not an extra. Prayer is uniting, and people of different theological persuasions can agree to pray together. And in all of this, in every church I've spoken in, there is always some split. You know, sometimes it's 90-10 or 80-20 or 60-40 or even 50-50. And this makes this conversation very, very difficult. And I commend you all at having a meeting like this, because so many churches don't know anything, and they're completely unaware of the chaos and the unraveling of our denomination and the choices that they have, and the clock is ticking. And so I admire you and commend you for having this meeting tonight. And I tell churches, you know, this is the good part in all of this is for you to sit down and talk about what are your core values as a congregation. What are the foundational beliefs of making a disciple? Because here's the thing, if you don't know, you can't agree on what a disciple is, what a disciple believes and how a disciple acts in life, then you're not ready to make a disciple. But if you know who you are, you got a grip on your vision and your values, then you are united. You're on the same page, and you are ready to be in mission and ministry to the neighborhood around you. And undoubtedly, if you come up with a consensus of your vision and your values, there will be some people in every congregation who will say, I just don't align with that vision. Those are not my values. And they're going to go someplace else. And that is okay. In fact, as a pastor, I have to say, one of the best reasons for someone to leave a church is because they don't share the vision. They don't align with the values. Because if you keep going to a church that you don't align with, then you're going to come home every Sunday grouchy, critical, and upset, lamenting and complaining. And that is not good for your soul. And your fellow parishioners, every Sunday, they're going to go home and they're going to be rankled because of the criticism and the complaints, and they're not going to be happy. Nobody's going to be happy in that scenario. So it is better for everyone to have a set of it, to know what your values are so that people can align with them. And when you have them, then you're ready to go into mission in the community. You'll be making disciples, not just bringing people to sit in your seats. And there's a big difference, right, between sitting in seats in church and actually being a disciple. So prayer is really important. Pray for the Global Methodist Church. Pray for the United Methodist Church. Pray for the Wesleyan Covenant Association. Pray for the wisdom, the strength, the courage to find a way for us to gracefully and peacefully separate and put this behind us so that we can get on with the business of making disciples for Jesus Christ. Be a non-anxious presence. There's a lot of anxiety in the system, and you probably have heard it or maybe even been a part of it because of the denomination and because of secular issues. I personally don't want to add to the anxiety and find ways to be a calming presence. We don't have to be combative or accusative with our progressive sisters and brothers. Find a way to show them grace and wish them well, and vice versa. Continuing on with our new movement, why should you join it? Because it will be a movement of orthodox theology that stands strongly and affirms the lordship of Jesus Christ and the authority of Scripture, right out of Jude 3 and 4. It will be a fresh start for the Methodist movement with no more fighting. Well, let's be real. There will always be. There will always be some. But we at least will be on the same page on the things that really matter, the gospel message. It will be leaner, simpler, and far less top-down in its decision-making. The emphasis will be on the local church as the primary and the only tool for making disciples. There will be a far simpler ordination process, and we will be able to create clergy, Orthodox clergy, much faster than the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church, I served on the Board of Ordained Ministry for 12 years, and I can tell you, we've got a process that is slow and clunky and expensive. It takes 10 years. If you're 18 years old and you feel a call to ministry to be a pastor in the United Methodist Church, it will take you 10 years and $150,000 in an undergraduate and graduate education. And at the end of the 10 years, the annual conference to decide whether they want you or not. This is why we have a shortage of young clergy, because the system discriminates against them. It is clunky, it doesn't work well, and it's not serving us. In the Global Methodist Church, there's going to be a much easier on-ramp for people to get into ministry and discover. It'll be much more like becoming a local pastor. You'll go to License to Preach school, you'll take a course of study, and you will start serving immediately. And at the end of that, you will be ordained. You'll not be a layperson with no rights. You'll be ordained as a clergy person. And there will also be a pathway to elders' ordination as well. There will be greater accountability for clergy, bishops, and churches, dramatically less bureaucracy, significantly less apportionments. Local churches will own their own property, greater autonomy for the local church, and simpler governing structure. Local church with greater input on pastoral appointments. The bottom line, contend for your faith. The new denomination will be poised to be much more effective in sharing the saving good news of Jesus, making new disciples of Him, and making the realities of heaven the realities of earth. So here's some websites, including the Michigan Area Wesleyan Covenant Association website. We have a Facebook page as well. Larry has my email. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. And I'm going to stop there and open it up for your questions. Yes?